All right, so that's kind of not a big joke, but you know what this guy is? Why is he on this?
His head grew, got a big head.
Yeah, he was accused of using human growth hormone as a performance-enhancing substance when he was a football player. It was never, I think, proven. But one of the effects of HGH is increased growth of muscle in adults, but also it encourages the growth of the skull and cranium and brow ridge and hands and feet. For example, Barry Bonds, I believe what I read was that Barry Bonds, another baseball, he was a baseball player, and he was accused of using steroids and HGH. I think they said his shoe size as an adult went from like 10 and a half to 13. His hat size grew like 3/4 of an inch or something like that. So that's where this comes from. So HGH is a hormone. That's why it's so. We just talked about nervous regulation. That nerve tissues can respond, take in information, make adjustments, maintain homeostasis. Chemicals can also do this. The chemical regulation is a form of regulation found in all organisms, and it works by using hormones. It's really important for you to know what hormones are and sort of how they work. Rather than really knowing specific hormones and what they do, it is important to know sort of in general how hormones work. So they're proteins, molecules of their complex shape that are produced in certain glands, we call them endocrine glands. And endocrine glands produce hormones, send them into the blood where they circulate throughout the organism. And although they circulate to all parts of the body, they actually only have their effect on very specific cells and tissues in the body. So how are they able to do that? How can they only affect certain cells and not others? They're reaching every cell in the body through the circulatory system, but they're actually only affecting specific cells. So how does this work? Stephanie?
Because their proteins are shaped to only interact with other cells or like hormones.
Yes, because of their shape, they only interact with cells that have a receptor molecule that matches. So cells have these proteins embedded in the cell membrane sometimes or inside of the cell that sort of matches together with the specific hormone. And if a cell doesn't have a receptor for, say, insulin, it's not affected by insulin. If it doesn't have a receptor for human growth hormone, it's not going to be affected by human growth hormone. Only the cells that have the proper receptors will be affected by those hormones. And they work by binding to them because the shape of the hormone fits in with the shape of the receptor, and that causes some change to happen within the cell. Hormones in humans are responsible for regulating all sorts of things. Our metabolism, maintaining homeostasis, growth, reproduction. Chemical control, these hormones work sort of on a little bit slower than nervous control. It takes a little bit more time for endocrine glands to produce hormones, for them to circulate throughout the body and have their impact. So it's a little bit slower acting as compared to nerve control. So throughout our body we have a whole bunch of glands called endocrine glands that make these hormones and send them into our blood supply. And so here are some diagrams that sort of illustrate what we were just talking about. If we have two hormones, hormone A, hormone B, that are being produced, they're traveling through the blood, and we have three different cells. This cell will be affected by hormone A because the receptor molecules it has in its cell membrane match with the shape of hormone A. This cell would be affected by both hormone A and B because it has both types of receptors. And this cell would only be affected by hormone B. So the type of receptor will indicate which hormones affect a certain cell, a certain tissue. And you see just a different view of it here. You see the hormones secreted by an endocrine gland traveling through the blood and then affecting certain cells that are, we call those the target cells, the cells that have the proper receptors. Hormones work, there's sort of two categories of hormones, steroid hormones and non-steroid hormones. The steroid hormones are able to pass through, the cell membrane is permeable to these hormones. So they actually don't bind with receptors on the outside of the cell. They can get right into the cell, into the cytoplasm, and then bind with a receptor in the cytoplasm. So these steroid hormones go right into the cells. Non-steroid hormones are not able to pass through the cell membrane, so they interact with a receptor on the cell membrane, which causes a change to happen usually, releasing a secondary messenger which actually has the effect on the cell. So there's sort of two modes of hormone action. And these hormones are produced and they have to be at certain levels, right, to maintain homeostasis within our body. And so there is a complex system of feedback usually that regulates the production and the levels of these hormones. And the endocrine system is pretty complex. Some glands produce hormones which stimulate other glands, produce other hormones which stimulate other glands, and you sort of have this cascade of effects. And this is an example. The hypothalamus is in our brain. It produces something called TRH. When that gets to the pituitary gland, it stimulates it to produce another hormone, TSH. Thyroid stimulating hormone. When this gets to the thyroid gland, it stimulates the thyroid gland to produce another hormone, thyroxine, which actually affects target cells. So we have all these systems. One stimulates the other, which stimulates the other, which has the effect. But at the same time, we have these feedbacks where the amount, when TSH increases, that actually inhibits and slows down the hypothalamus producing this, so it doesn't increase too much. And the thyroid hormones have feedback here into the pituitary and the hypothalamus that inhibit the production of these. So things are maintained at the proper level through this complex system of feedback. So here's a diagram showing many of the primary endocrine glands in humans. And you don't have to really memorize all of the glands and which hormone they produce and so forth. You should just be familiar with sort of the general idea of them. So some of these are in the brain. Our brain is sort of a connection between the nervous and endocrine system. In the brain is the hypothalamus, the pineal gland, the pituitary gland. Pituitary gland is often called the master gland because it produces a whole bunch of other hormones that stimulate other endocrine glands. The thyroid gland is like shaped like a bow tie in your neck. That helps regulate our metabolism. Attached to it are these parathyroid glands, which help regulate calcium, with the pancreas, which we'll talk about in a minute, to regulate blood sugar, ovaries in females to produce estrogen, progesterone, testes in males to produce testosterone, to help regulate secondary sex characteristics and the menstrual cycle in women. So there's a whole variety. There's the adrenal glands, which are responsible for producing adrenaline and stress hormones. And there's others as well, but these are some of the main ones. We'll talk about some examples just to sort of illustrate how these work. Probably the most important one is here for you to really understand well, and probably something you've talked about several times. So the pancreas. Pancreas is an endocrine organ as well as doing other things. And pancreas's job, one of them, is to regulate blood sugar. So if we imagine, we'll go through what this diagram shows. Normal blood glucose levels are about 90 milligrams per 100 milliliters of blood. That fluctuates somewhat, but that's kind of a baseline normal level. Let's say this morning you ate some, you ate 6 Pop-Tarts and a bowl of Fruity Pebbles. So currently, sugar is streaming into your blood supply from all of that food, and your blood glucose levels would be increasing. Your pancreas is monitoring your blood sugar levels. What happens is when blood glucose levels rise beyond that normal level, it stimulates the pancreas. There's special cells in the pancreas called beta cells, and it stimulates them to produce insulin, a hormone. Insulin goes into your blood, travels all throughout your body. But its main effects are in the liver, some other body cells. And when insulin binds to the receptors in the liver, the signal it sends them, it tells the liver to take in glucose from the blood and store it. And so when insulin gets to the liver takes glucose out of the blood and stores it, and therefore the blood glucose level drops. When it drops enough that it gets back to a normal level, the pancreas again realizes and shuts down that insulin production. And so the blood glucose level has been regulated by insulin. The pancreas also does the opposite sort of job. It monitors blood sugar, and when blood sugar drops too low, then you have the bottom half of this diagram look at. Other cells in the pancreas, when it senses low blood sugar, produces a different hormone called glucagon. Glucagon, again, has many of its effects in the liver, and it tells the liver, blood sugar levels too low, please release some into the blood. Blood glucose level rises back to maintain homeostasis, and we're back to a normal level. So we have this constant monitoring and adjusting of our blood glucose levels to keep it in the normal range. And we'll talk about breakdowns in this in a minute. This is the pituitary gland. It produces a whole host of different hormones. Okay? And like I said, these hormones affect other endocrine glands. FSH, LH, growth hormone, prolactin, ACTH, thyroid stimulating hormone, oxytocin, antidiuretic hormone. These are all produced by this tiny little gland up in our brain. And so these hormones often affect other endocrine glands. So this is the master gland. Just a diagram sort of illustrating blood glucose levels. We see that as the glucose levels in the blood change, that's the solid red line. Insulin levels in the blood change, just on a very slight delay after blood glucose levels increase. Insulin increases, that brings blood sugar down, insulin levels drop, and you have this constant moderation of blood glucose levels, sort of to keep them in a certain rate. The adrenal glands, these are the glands, they sit on top of our kidneys. Okay? And they are responsible for several things, but one thing is dealing with stress. And so, you've heard of adrenaline. What does adrenaline do to a person's body? You say, oh, I got a lot of adrenaline, or that ride I went on an amusement park. Increases your heart rate, increases your blood pressure. If you ever get really scared, somebody, your little brother hid in the closet when you got home from school, jumped out, scared you really bad, you get a certain feeling in your body, right? You jump. Your heart starts racing. Maybe your stomach feels weird. Okay? All of those things, or if you dog chased you down the road when you're going for a run, right? Those situations lead to your adrenal glands producing adrenaline, sometimes called the fight or flight response. This hormone is preparing your body to either fight off some threat or to run away and escape the threat. And so when adrenaline is released in your body, glucose is mobilized, so you'll have energy, your breathing rate increases, your heart rate increases, your blood pressure increases. This is getting you ready for a fight or to run. And generally after the threat is removed, then those conditions, the adrenaline drops off, and then we go back to our normal condition. There are other hormones that are responsible for stress. They're longer acting hormones. And so sometimes when we have high levels of stress, not a sudden scare, but high levels of stress for a longer period of time, there can be many negative effects on many of our body systems. Because some of these hormones result in increased blood pressure and suppressing of the immune system and so forth. So if you ever heard your parents tell you, you're going to get sick because you're so stressed out, there's actually something to that, because our immune system responds to this long-term stress, and it's inhibited in those ways. So sometimes, if you have a big show coming up and you're stressed out and you have lots of assignments and lots of work going on, then that is sometimes the times you're going to get a cold or get sick because of that toll it takes on your body. Hormones are also responsible for growth and development and reproduction. In humans, for example, the female ovulation and menstrual cycle is all regulated by 4 hormones. Luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, progesterone, estrogen. These regulate the reproductive cycle to allow for ovulation and pregnancy, and if not pregnancy, the menstruation, to control those things. In males, the testes produce testosterone, which leads to the development of male secondary sex characteristics. Hormones in other types of animals cause them to go through this process of metamorphosis, change in body structure over time. This is complete metamorphosis, a caterpillar going through various stages to metamorphose into the butterfly. Okay, that's controlled by hormones. Okay, or the development of the tadpole into the frog, the molting of this cricket, and so forth. So a breakdown in our endocrine system causes a variety of problems. There's many types of diseases caused by the endocrine glands being damaged, not working properly, producing too much of their hormone, producing too little of their hormone. All of these things can result in a variety of diseases. One of the most common endocrine disorders is diabetes. So those cells in the pancreas that produce insulin, produce glucagon, sometimes they are damaged. Sometimes our body's own immune system attacks and destroys those cells for reasons that are still not clear. And if those cells are destroyed, a person no longer produces insulin and glucagon properly, and therefore is unable to regulate their blood glucose level internally. And so when a person has diabetes, they sort of need to take control of their blood glucose level by themselves, by monitoring it, by testing their blood sugar level, by giving themselves insulin through injection or through a pod or through the infusion site. Lots of ways to get insulin into our body. If their blood sugar level drops too low, then they need to eat something containing sugar, containing glucose to bring their levels back up. But basically they need to sort of take control and do the job that the pancreas would have done automatically. They need to do it manually. Thyroid disorders are very common. So the thyroid gland regulates our metabolism. If we have an underactive thyroid gland, it leads to our thyroid gland producing too little of its hormone, thyroxine, leads to a low metabolic rate, low levels of burning energy, a lower heart rate, lead to a person gaining weight very easily because their metabolism is very low. It can be caused by different things. Sometimes the lack of iodine in our diet. Our thyroid gland needs iodine to work. If we don't get enough, it doesn't work properly. In extreme cases, it can swell up to an extreme level, like that. That's called goiter. So it can be extreme. And so if a person has that, they can have surgery, they can be given more iodine in their diet. Now, have you ever seen on a canister of salt that says it's iodized salt? They actually put iodine into salt in order to get people into people's diet so they have enough of it. The opposite also happens. Sometimes a person has an overactive thyroid gland, produces too much thyroxine. And it's sort of like the opposite effects happen. They have a high heart rate. Okay? They have a high metabolism. You might have difficulty keeping weight on. You may be very thin. Leads to sort of some characteristics like bulging eyes is one of the characteristics of hyperthyroidism. Being nervous and things like that. A person can have surgery, or they can actually destroy part of their thyroid gland using radioactive iodine to help bring down their thyroid levels. Here's just some equipment for testing and regulating diabetes. There's lots of technology now that people have. Some people still test manually and give themselves manual injections of insulin. Other people have a pump that can monitor their blood glucose levels. They can give themselves insulin through the pump that's attached to an infusion site. There are even insulin inhalers. There's insulin pods a person might wear. You know, there's lots of new technology. It's probably not too far off that we've almost developed an artificial pancreas that does the monitoring, administers insulin when necessary. We don't quite have that, but we are relatively close to that. A couple others, pituitary disorders. So the pituitary gland is the gland that produces growth hormone and lots of other things. We'll talk about growth hormone disorders. So sometimes a person's pituitary gland is underactive and doesn't produce enough growth hormone. And if that happens during normal development in childhood, leads to a person not growing to a normal height, to normal stature. It's called dwarfism. You'll be seeing more of him in a couple weeks. If it's caught early, sometimes we can get artificial human growth hormone to be given to somebody with a deficiency to help them to grow to a more normal height. The opposite condition also happens where a person's pituitary gland produces too much growth hormone. That leads to gigantism. Okay? Anyone know how tall the tallest person ever documented medically? Yeah, 8'11". Robert Wadlow. He had a tumor on his pituitary gland that caused it to produce an excess of growth hormone and produce it constantly. So he grew throughout his entire life until he died. He was always growing. He grew to 8'11". And he didn't stop growing even when he was in his 20s. And so, you know, if a person has that overactive pituitary gland, they can have surgery to try to reduce the amount being produced. But you know who this guy is? Yeah. Anyone ever watch a documentary about him? It's pretty interesting. Yeah. Andre the Giant he was a wrestler. Yeah. He had that gigantism. Other adrenal disorders. This has to do with cortisol, these stress hormones. There can be over-secretion and under-secretion. And again, they cause problems in a variety of body systems. You know, Cushing's disease caused by over-secretion of cortisol, stress hormone produced in the adrenal glands, leads to puffiness, high blood sugar levels, excess fat being produced. And this is an example. This is an example of that. Addison's disease is the opposite, an undersecretion of these stress hormones. Can damage, it's often due to damage to the adrenal glands, leading a person being very thin, lack of energy, being weak, hyperpigmentation, especially in the gums, where the gums turn like a blackish color. So those are some examples of some of those disorders. Now plants have hormones as well. So we think of sort of hormones as something present in animals. Plants have hormones that control how they grow, when they reproduce, when they drop their leaves, when seeds start growing, and so forth. So they don't have glands, but they are produced in cells of the plant. And these hormones are responsible for what we call tropisms, the growth of a plant in response to a certain stimulus. If you turn a plant on its side, the stem will grow upward. The roots will grow downward. It's responding to gravity. It's called geotropism. The plants I have over here, they're all pretty much growing toward the light. That's called phototropism. Some plants are sensitive even to touch. This is a sensitive plant. If you touch the leaves, they all curl up. One important plant hormone is called opsin. And it's interesting how opsin works. Opsin is why plants grow towards the sun. So what happens is the tip of a plant that's growing, the tip of the stem, produces opsin, which sort of moves down through the cells and causes them to grow, elongate. But opsin is destroyed by sunlight. So when the sun is shining on this plant from this side, the opsin on the sunny side is destroyed, so those cells don't grow as long. On the shady side, the opsin is not destroyed. Those cells elongate more, and that causes that growth of the plant towards the light. There's other hormones as well, gibberellin, cytokinins, ethylene, and they affect and are responsible for different parts of how the plant responds. Some, like gibberellin, is used for germination. Okay? It dictates when a seed will begin germinating. And there's hormones responsible for the growth of the plant to maturity, when it flowers, when it produces fruits, when it drops its leaves, and so forth. And these hormones regulate all those parts of plant reproduction and growth, sort of just like they do in animals. Last slide for today. This is interesting. This is how they figured out how opsin works. So in a normal control plant that's growing, a seed that's germinated, it grows towards the light. And so the question scientists were asking, okay, was how does this happen? So they did a bunch of experiments that helped them figure this out. When they grew the same plant, but they cut the tip of the plant off, it just grew straight up. It didn't curve. So that led them to know, well, there's something in the tip of this plant that's responsible for the growing towards the light. Then they did an experiment. They put a little cap on the plant that wouldn't allow light through. And in that case, again, the plant grew straight up. So that let them understand, well, there's something about the light that's having an impact. When they put a transparent cap on the top, it did grow to the light. Okay. When they put a opaque covering over the base, that didn't have an effect. So they know something about light interacting, the growing tip of the plant was responsible for this phototropism. Later on, the experiments they did, they separated the tip. They cut it off and separated it with a gelatin block, which would still allow things to move through the tip of the plant, or with a solid block that did not allow things. This one grew towards the light, and this did not. And so by understanding all of these different experiments is how we figured out this, that opsin is destroyed by the light, causing the growth towards the plant. All right, any questions about the endocrine system or hormones?